So here we have an overview of measuring secularisation. So within the secularisation debate, there are two key arguments. The first of these is that secularisation is happening. The church is in decline, and this often comes from using substantive definitions, looking at what religion is, focusing on a very small number of generally traditional religions. The second debate within secularisation is that it isn't happening, that actually religion is just changing, and we're moving from sort of traditional religions to newer, more contemporary forms. Anti-secularisation theorists tend to use functional definitions here, which includes a much wider range of beliefs within this kind of category of religion. Three key concepts to be aware of is secularisation, and the secularisation thesis. So secular is just something that's not religious, non-religious items, individuals, ideas. Secularisation is the process in which religious thinking, practice and institutions lose their significance, which is the measurement that Wilson introduced. And the secularisation thesis is just a theory that secularisation is happening. Now I mentioned Wilson, here are his measurements. So Wilson gave us a kind of definition of secularisation, taking into account practice, institutions, and beliefs. And these are, I think, key ways of looking at whether secularisation is happening. He also operationalised the idea of secularisation by giving us measurable and recordable changes taking place. Now, the first of Wilson's measurements was the idea of participation and belief. And this is essentially how many people go to religious events, religious gatherings, or to worship. Wilson argued that in Britain there has been a decline in church attendance. In 1851, 40% of people attended church. By 2010, this has dropped to 6%. We've seen an average age of church attenders grow. So often most people going to church around 51, which is getting older. And the number of weddings and baptisms that are taking place in a church are dropping year on year and are much lower than they were historically. Now, these statistics do show a change, however, they are problematic. We do have to recognise that churches record their participation in different ways. But if we look at the census data from 2011, from Wales and England, the number of people who identified as Christians dropped from 72% to 59%. Those who identified as having no religion had gone up from 15% to 25% in a 10-year window. However, despite all this, there's been a rise of the sacred self, belief about belonging, particularly from the work of Davy. So people are practicing religion in their own ways, in their own homes. You don't necessarily need to go to church anymore. Wilson's second measurement was religious disengagement. Now, this is basically the church and the state becoming separate. Wilson argued that religious organisations have seen a loss in their power, their wealth, their influence, particularly over governments. So there's been a decline in the political role of the church, and Parsons talked about structural differentiation, saying that the church would focus on its beliefs and its systems, losing all its other roles. So we could see that in the sense of the church has lost its role in education and government, and it's now focusing on itself. We also can see that there's been a rise of faith schools, so that does kind of challenge some of these arguments. Now, church also has less influence over the law and lawmaking practices. So the Same-Sex Marriage Act of 2014 changed the law. It allowed same-sex marriages to take place in religious environments and establishments. This obviously challenged the accepted sort of narrative of the church. However, it is worth recognising that in the UK there has been a disengagement between church and state, but this doesn't apply to every country. There are lots of countries where religion and church, or church and the state, are very tightly knit. Religious pluralism talks about the variety of religion, the fact that there are far more religions in society now than there were historically. Wilson argues that the religious pluralism means that no religion has the dominant power or promotes a value consensus. Imagine all the potential religious individuals in society kind of being a pie. The more religions there are, they're going to take a smaller slice of that pie, and means that each one of them has less power than if there was one single religion claiming a monopoly over all individuals. So choice does lead to more competition between those religions, and that can obviously reduce the amount of religious participation. We've also seen the growth of NRMs and NAMs being a good indication of this. However, as the Kendall Project highlighted, the religion is changing. The decline of traditional religions, the rise of NRMs and NAMs is just a sign of changing religion. Desacralization and rationalization. So this is the belief that we've become more rational in our thinking, more scientific, and that's reducing the value of beliefs that are religious. So Wilson suggests that as a society that's becoming more organized, more rational, more scientific, we're basing our ideas on these rational, reasoned arguments rather than faith. Religious ideas are not rational and they cannot be tested, and therefore people prefer to use scientific explanations. However, there has been a growing distrust in science. Weber also argued that there's a process of demystification, the removal of mystery. So as we become more rational, demystification takes place, disenchantment of the world occurs, where the world is no longer magical and mystical, and scientific thinking becomes the dominant mindset. But we do need to remember, again, the Kendall Project highlights that we're not rejecting science, we're just changing our beliefs. So we're maybe still keeping that mysticism, magical, and that enchantment nature of religion, but it's changing to maybe more practical uses like crystal healing and Reiki and some of these newer age movements. And then last but not least, we have the secularization of the institution themselves. So churches have moved from purely spiritual centres to more community-based centres. Herberg saw that internal secularization within a church, particularly in the US, has seen a decline in authentic religions. Ultimately, the church waters down its belief systems to accommodate and be more acceptable to wider society. Bella also has an element here with the civil religion, that Americans may be engaging with the church and participating, but more because it's seen as an American value or what an American does, rather than particularly holding that religious belief. And as society develops, as we become more liberal, more diverse, and more accepting of diversity, then religions may have to water down their traditional beliefs further to be compatible with modern day society. But just in response to this, the growth of fundamentalism as a response to liberal values. So these religions have grown where more stricter, more authentic, more committed to literal interpretations of a religious text. And these have grown as society becomes more diverse. And there we have it. So that is secularization, the Wilson's 5 measurements, a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but I wanted to make sure I covered all of these with enough time to discuss them. Thanks for watching, and I hope this has been of some use.